Thank you so much for being here. I'm Nick Erickson, your host for this webinar. Today, I'm joined by Dan Caesar, the product manager for all of Instron's static testing software. This includes Bluehill Universal, Bluehill Central, and the additional modules like TrendTracker that he'll be discussing today. We expect the presentation should take between 30 and 40 minutes. And then if you have any questions, please use the Q&A to submit these at any time. We're going to aim to address these at the end. I also want to mention that we are recording this webinar and that all of you will receive an email afterwards with a link to the video, and it will also be available on our website, instron.com. So with that said, I'll turn things over to Dan to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Nick, and welcome everyone again. So let's just give an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So before getting to the actual demonstration itself, going into the application, seeing the charts that we're going to spend most of the time on, I want to just make sure that we get an overview of Bluehill Central, the application. It is pretty new, so I just want to give a little bit of an overview for the entire application, but then specifically TrendTracker, which is one of the modules that is available within Central that we'll be spending time in today. So just quick intro for both of those. Then the meat of this is going to be in the demo. And as Nick mentioned, we'll close off, like all of our webinars, with a Q&A session. Okay, so first, quick introduction to Bluehill Central. And it's a lab management application. So it was released just a couple of years ago, so pretty new in terms of the Instron environment and product offering. And it is not a replacement of Bluehill Universal or our testing software. That Bluehill Central is not controlling the test frame. It works alongside those testing applications as a lab management tool that really helps you remotely manage the Bluehill files, results that are getting generated from the equipment, your users who are running tests or changing methods and accessing files, and certain settings, and it allows you to do that in a centralized location. So if we look at the diagram that's been playing, that we have the laboratory that we should be familiar with, and we have some Instron systems with their PCs running the testing software, so say Bluehill Universal. And traditionally, these are localized, right? So you might have to copy a method from system 1 to system 2 to share it. If you're creating and managing users, you have to do that management on each system, and you have to walk up to that piece of equipment, which is inefficient and can create some risk. So in that, if you accidentally, if you make a change on one system but forget to make it on a second, or you do something differently, then your testing process is slightly at risk of producing data that is not consistently being tested. And so that's really the core foundation of the value of Bluehill Central when you add it to your lab, is that now instead of that localized nature, we're sending and storing those files and those settings to a central place. So to a SQL server that your IT is managing, so that whenever you walk up to a connected frame, we're grabbing that latest test method. We're grabbing the latest permissions associated to the user who's logging in. And there's no duplication. It's just that one source of the truth that's stored centrally. And where the viewer for Bluehill Central comes into play. So in this diagram, we're kind of showing the most common setup that people have tended to use Bluehill Central in, is that the application itself, you might be installing that on your work computer in the office to do some of this remote management. And so that's advantageous to doing these same actions on the test system, because what does that mean? If you're trying to do these managerial actions like setting up users, checking out historical files, maybe doing some traceability reviews, so reviewing changes, looking at the audit trail, if you do have those features, that you don't want to have to kick an operator off of the frame to do those activities. That you want to, the most efficient way is to do them from a remote location. But certainly if that isn't an issue, if it's okay to down the system because they're not used very often, not used consistently throughout the day, then yeah, certainly no problem. You can install Bluehill Central, this viewer application, also on the PC next to the frame. So either anything works. The most common is kind of what is displayed with this diagram. And when you're in the Bluehill Central application, you're gonna see this home screen, which we'll see in a minute when I get into TrendTracker. But we have lab management and traceability. So lab management is our file system where you're storing your test methods and results. That comes along with traceability, which is our compliance offering for people that need to have an audit trail, that need to track everything that's happening on all the connected systems and have an audit trail to refer to. And in addition to that, it allows you to formally require approvals and electronic signatures to sign off on changes to methods and to approve test results and other file changes. Then we have TrendTracker and then settings. And so settings is just configuring users and other system settings. But yeah, today we're going to hone in on TrendTracker. So when we're considering TrendTracker and trying to determine whether or not it will add value to your lab, there's a couple simple questions that you can ask yourself. So the first being is, are you looking for more visibility into the status of and to the trends of your product's quality? And the second one is your post-test data analysis tedious? Is it manual? So what we mean by that is Bluehill testing software. We have a few different mechanisms for exporting data. So you might be creating a PDF report. You might be using our CSV exports to export those test results from any given test. But a lot of times you're trying to do an analysis of not just that one sample, but of previous samples and compare the results. And how do you do that today? Is it tedious? Is it manual in the sense that you have to combine multiple files, copy and paste into one common file to then do that analysis? And so that is what a lot of our customers have historically done and gotten used to, but it's of course time consuming and kind of a burden, where those are really the two core pieces of value that TrendTracker brings to the table. And how do we do that? So going back to that primary function that we're able to do within TrendTracker, which we cannot do with our testing software. So say Bluehill Universal by itself or Bluehill 3 by itself, that when you're analyzing in those testing software applications, that you only are looking at the sample that you've opened. You only are looking at statistics for that single sample. But TrendTracker, those results from each sample are getting sent to the database and you're allowed to, of course, query and do analysis on all of the data being produced. So we use queries, which you'll see today, to make sure that you're filtering to see only the data that you care about. You'll be able to see all of the test results in a table, but you can also display them in different charts, and there's different charting options, and really those charts are where we're going to spend our time today. And then it's worth noting that if the fundamental calculations and the calculations offered within TrendTracker do not suffice, then you can export. You can export any query that you're running to a CSV or to an XML to be used in a different application for your needs. So jumping into our scenario that we're going to be kind of using in this demonstration, that we're going to pretend that I am a manufacturer of titanium, so different titanium alloys, and that I have a client that's come to us and said, hey, we need these particular specifications. Can you get that product for us? And of course, we want this client's business. And so we agree, but it's not an off off-the-shelf product for us, and that the particular strength they're looking for maybe is a little bit different from what we typically have available. And for the simplicity of this demo, of course, if you're needing to source titanium or any other material, you're probably not just caring about the ultimate tensile strength of the material. You probably care about where it's going to yield, what stress, what strain, what's the stiffness in the elastic region. There's some pretty critical things that you're going to care about, but for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to keep it simple, really focus in on the UTS of the material we're producing. So that is the acceptance limits defined by our customer is between 430 and 480 megapascals. And from a acceptable variation point of view, it's 10 MPa or lower. And because this is not off the shelf, we're having iterative development where before we can sell this product to the client, before we can produce it for them, that there's this initial development stage where this product that we'll say is product A, that's this, keep it simple here. We're going to start with kind of the iteration A1 to A2, A3, all the way to the current rev of this compound, of this product, is A11. And at some point in those iterations, we've kind of fulfilled the requirements, and then we're comfortable of releasing this to production and selling it to the client. So what I'm going to do is, that's kind of setting the scene where all of what we're going to see is all the testing, all the tensile testing. So it's kind of in this top right image is maybe what, if we hone in on the test space of gripping this round specimen with a universal test system and pulling it apart to see how strong it is and other material properties, that's happening with every batch that we're producing. And so that's our primary way of understanding the quality of our manufacturing process. Okay, so that sets the scene. So now if I jump out of our presentation and go directly into Bluehill Central. So if you could imagine, I might be a quality assurance manager for the production line and I was assigned to this particular client, making sure that this alloy is meeting their requirements, that I could, from my desk, open up Bluehill Central to monitor the activity of those tests. So I could go directly into TrendTracker. And what am I first faced with? I have to choose the search template that I care about for whatever I'm trying to look at it today. And I'll see all of the different search templates that I've saved in the past. And the way that we've organized this is that I have a particular search for each design iteration. But then I also have one that shows me everything. It shows me the history of every test that has been run for this particular client through all the different design iterations. So I'm going to start there. And whenever you click on a particular search template, what does it do? It talks to the database and it returns any test record that satisfies the criteria that you've specified. So the criteria is found in this upper part of the workspace. You can collapse it if you're happy with it to see more. But for this, I've said, hey, anything that starts with A, which will cover everything, give me a result. So there's 4,800 tests. Each one of these rows is corresponding to a single test specimen from however many samples were run. If you needed to further refine this, you can choose a different search criteria. You can have multiple search criteria calling out time periods, system IDs, users, anything that's getting sent with each test sample, which is a bunch of default information like user and system ID and the method name and save date and things like that, or particular test results that you care about. So there's different ways of defining your search criteria. I've kept it pretty simple in this case. So pretty standard querying. And in this case, I'm showing the table. So every search will return results to the table. You can define what columns you care about. So again, keeping it simple, I'm just showing the product ID, what was the UTS of that test, and who ran the test. And you can group things. So I've already gone ahead and grouped by product ID, which is all you're doing is taking that column header and dragging it into the top to group by a particular column. And I've enabled my sub statistics so I can see the mean and standard deviation. But we also have the other kind of fundamental statistics of median, min and max, and variation. So you can show those for each subgroup, and then also for the entire batch, which we call the grand statistics. So that is just a quick review of the table, but again, we're here to talk a little bit more about the charts. So I'm going to show you the charts that I've configured. You can have as many charts as you want. Typically, you're not going to be continuously modifying those. You're going to have 2 or 3 charts that you care about, and those are the ones that you'll just always be able to refer to and not have to really change the settings on. But the one I want to first talk about is this individual run chart. So what we're seeing here is that every single dot represents one test specimen that was tested. And so you can immediately see that there seems to be groupings and such, and that's of course corresponding to the different compounds and iterations of the material that we're testing for this client. And the y-axis is of course our UTS, because I'm charting the ultimate tensile strength. And again, left to right is the very first specimen, all the way to the most recently tested specimen that satisfies the search criteria. So if we look at the settings on the right-hand side, there is a window you can pop out and where you're defining, okay, what's the title? What do I want to call this? You're choosing the metric that you care about. So again, my data set, all I had exported was UTS, but if you had your yield strength and your strain at yield and things, you'd be able to choose which metric you want to chart. And then you say, okay, what type of chart do I want to create? So there's individual and group charts. So we'll start with individuals and we'll get to the group charts later. And when you choose individual, you have our run chart, which we're displaying here. The other option is a histogram. So if you want to just see the distribution, you will first, the only real specification is, hey, how many bins do you want? We have a max of 25 bins, but you can say, okay, how many bins do I care about? And you'll see that distribution as it buckets your different results into those set number of bins. So pretty normal histogram. But let's get back to the run chart, see what the other settings are. One is a rule check. So right now it says none, it's set to none. There is these WECO rules, or Western Electric Company rules. It's a set of 8 rules or indicators that you might have a out of control process. And we'll talk about those rules with a different chart. And then the basic rules are taking the first rule of the Western Electric Company ones and saying that's the only one we're going to apply, and flag. And so when you do select a rule, then if it actually breaks that rule as an indicator that you might have an out of control process, you're going to get a flag that will tell you, okay, this is the value and this is the rule that was broken, and it'll allow you to evaluate if that's okay or not. So they're kind of just indicators. All right, then we get into these toggles where you can choose to display different pieces of information. So the mean value. If you care about the mean value, you can chart the mean. In this case, it doesn't make too much sense where I'm showing all of the different groups on one chart. So it's the mean value might be more important for each individual compound or design iteration. If you have customer requirements, if there are specifications that you are trying to stay between, or limits you're trying to stay between, then you can specify these with the upper and lower acceptance limits. So they're user-defined lines as upper and lower. And when you turn on acceptance limits, then we're going to give you access to these SPC metrics. So they're process capability and performance metrics that if you turn it on or off, you'll see in this bottom left-hand corner that they display or turn off. And I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a minute. So other toggles are control limits. So yeah, there's an upper and lower control limit that can be turned on. And so this is just another way of understanding the variation of the the data set that you've queried. Uses the mean value of the data set, looks at the average of a moving range, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it's one way of looking at your process variation. Similarly, maybe a little bit more common is just your mean plus or minus standard 1, 2, or 3 standard deviations. So whenever you do choose one of these choices, that in the key you'll see, okay, these are all the UTS values. This is my upper lower limit. These are the other things. So it'll call out what those lines are. And then the last option for this individual run chart is the moving range chart. So what does that do? That actually puts a second chart on the bottom. So the first, on the top, we still see each test result. And then on the bottom, we have a moving range chart, which is essentially when you take specimen 1 to 2, you look at the difference between those. That's this particular value, you plot it. And then you do the same for 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and you have a bunch of ranges from those consecutive specimens. And that's your moving range. So it's just another way of viewing kind of the variations test to test. So those are our individual charts. But let's move on to the group charts. So the other type. So I have a pre-configured group chart that's an X bar. So X bar is the mean value of, again, UTS, and that's what we care about, that ultimate tensile strength value. So how did I set this one up? So again, I'm choosing UTS, but instead of individual, I've chosen group. And when you choose a group, you have a couple options. You can group by a column or group by a fixed size. And so in my case, I care about what's the difference between this design, this rev versus this rev. So rev A1 to A2 to A3 to A4 to A5, all the way to where I am today. Let's compare each of those groupings. And so I'm going to group by a column because that product ID is a column that I care about and that I've exported. The other way is I don't care about a parameter or particular column. That just take every 2 specimens, put it into a group, and the average value for that is what's going to be plotted. So it's basically subset. If you want to, you can go, I think between 2 and 25 is the size of the groups. So if I try 26, yeah, it's going to say it's out of range. So up to 25 in terms of the fixed size groupings that you can create. So those are the 2 options in terms of how you are able to group things. But as I'm going to choose column, it's going to ask me what column do I care about. So I'm going to choose my product ID. And that's how you've set up what you want to group by, how you want to group. But what is the actual chart that you care about? And there's a number of options. And what I've chosen to display first is this X bar chart, where each point is saying, okay, A1, every test of A1, average it together to get the mean UTS. So you can see over time, as we're trying to hit this specification of getting between 430 and 480 MPa, that we're slowly trending in the right direction. Clearly something happened with the A5 rev. But of course, this is kind of important as you're looking at the trend of the strength of your material over time, as you've been forced to change the compound. And again, you can display the mean value if you want, your acceptance limits, and then the SPC, the metrics. And so I'll spend a little bit of time on these metrics right now. So you can see, again, toggle on, toggle off. It's this display right here. And we have PP, PPK, and CP and CPK. And really the two differences that are important to call out is that the entire population, when you're looking at every single individual value, and that's in your metric is representative of the entire population, meaning every individual value, all 4,800 records. That's when you're looking at the PP and PPK values. So you'll notice 0.63, 0.2. If I go back to that individual run chart, I see 0.63, 0.2, because this is the entire population. But when I am grouping things, and you then do the same calculation, but instead of on the entire population, you're doing these subgroupings and the values of them, that's when we see these batched or CP and CPK values appear, which are different because it's referring to these average values of each subsample. And then the difference between just the lowercase p and then the PK, so the PK has to do how well is my data centered between my acceptance limits. And so that's why you only have access to those values when you actually have defined acceptance limits, because it's part of the calculation. So the PK for each is how well it's centered, and then the P is just how well it's grouped together, how tightly the population is. So that's the X bar chart. Talked a little bit more about those metrics. And let's look at other options. So the R chart is another group chart where this looks a little bit wonky because my acceptance limits are all the way up here. But an R chart is the range. So it looks at the max and min value of that sample and produces the range for each given grouping that you've created. So if this was a specification that our client cared about, then I would be putting the upper and lower tolerance or acceptance limit to represent what is good and or what's acceptable. The next option is the standard deviation chart, the S chart. And so actually that is something that our client cares about. So that actually is a chart that I have saved and would be routinely looking at as I'm continuously monitoring the performance of our material. So in this case, what is an S chart? It's the standard deviation, like I said. And for our client, that they require the standard deviation to be a maximum of 10. And so you can see as we've gone through the design process A1, A2, A3, okay, something happened where it was a bad batch for that compound, but we're trending in the right direction. I believe that we went into production at A8, and then we had a couple changes in production. One change was adverse and caused a quick correction to where we are today. And so this is showing, again, standard deviation. So you're typically looking at a few different things that you might care about for mean value, or just how, or other statistics to understand if your process is under control or not. All right, other options are X bar R. So what does that do? That then puts two of them together. So you can have your mean, your X bar on the top, your R chart on the bottom. You can do X bar S, mean on the top, standard deviation on the bottom. And then you can do a box plot. So we already showed histogram, but a box plot or a box and whisker plot is essentially this component. This is made up of a number of areas. So to create this for every product ID, what does it do? Your min's at the bottom, your max is at the top for the full subsample. The median value splits it in half. And then you have this lower half where, again, you look at the lower half, you take the median of that, and then you take the upper half and you take the median of that, and that gives you these 4 quartiles. So Q1, 2, 3, and 4 are the 4 quartiles, made up of kind of the medians of the data set, and then the min and the max are the whiskers. So ideally, you have short whiskers, and just a compact, or however compact it is. I guess it depends on the acceptance limits for your given client. So as long as you're well within those, then this can be a useful tool to just see again how that variation is changing with a slightly different take on the visual. So that shows basically all of the charting functions. What I want to do is show an individual batch, and that'll give us a little bit more insight into how I monitor the current production batch. And so to do that, we can look at other searches. So when you're using TrendTracker, you can use these icons in the top right to maybe save what you've done, to close it out, or to add a new search. So you can have multiple templates open at the same time. Maybe you want to always open a few of them to bounce back and forth. But today, I think I'm going to open a few of them. I'll open A8. So that was our first production batch. And then I'll open A9 and A10 to just show you the last 4 designs that we've had running in every test that we've been performing as production's been ongoing. A10, and our current is A11. Okay, so I can start with A8. Maybe hide this for now, but so this was our first. This is what got us to actually start selling product to our client, where you can see not a single test we ran outside of their acceptance limits. I have the standard deviation graphed, but if I look at the chart, maybe I go back to the table, because that might be the best way to just look at the actual values achieved, where mean value is good. The standard deviation of everything that we've tested is well within the max of 10. And I can look at every single test, and it's, like I said, above this lower limit. So this was all systems where all things pointed to that we can start shipping this to the client. But you'll see that there are some of these little red flags. So some of these things that indicate that there might be a process that's run out of control. So what is this one that we're looking at? So this one is rule number 4. And it says that 8 out of 8, so 8 consecutive points are on the same side of the center line, meaning, okay, if you were to graph the median, or sorry, the mean value, that there's actually 8 tests that are above the mean, which could indicate that something happened to material that's used for the compound, the equipment that you're using for manufacturing, something's getting potentially skewed upwards, and it's a established trend, 8 in a row. So if you look at another one, what is another rule? Wait, so that was rule 4. Rule 3, similarly, it's really tracking the consistency of the data, and that if you are consistently outside of a certain sigma, or if you are consistently above or consistently below, or even alternating back and forth and back and forth and back and forth 10 consecutive times, or there's a certain number. I know one of the rules is that back and forth behavior, that those could indicate that something's happened in your manufacturing process that is a little abnormal, based on the trend of how each data point compares to the set. So this one, 4 out of 5 points are outside and on the same side of the 1 sigma control limits. So it's a little bit different than 8 out of 8 are on the same side of the center line. I think the rest of these are all infractions of those same 2 rules. But I encourage you, there are 8 rules if you do have the WECO rules enabled. They're defined in our help file. They're defined in our white paper that's online on our website. That, of course, if you don't have our application, you can't access the help file, but you can go onto our website to look at our charts and stats in more detail. So that is the first one that made production. Let's go to the second. So this is a long production run where things seem to be okay, but again, post-production, why are we changing things? We're trying to save cost on from 9 to 10, that there was we identified a particular compound that was cheaper, and we thought we could keep it within the same limits, and we make the change. Or another change was that a current supplier said, hey, sorry, we can't give this material to you anymore. You got to find an alternative. And so you're kind of forced to make these changes throughout the production cycle, that you want to try to be able to monitor how it's impacted your overall product quality. So go to 10. This was the problematic batch that we made the switch. So even though every test is within my acceptance limits, if I look at the standard deviation, we've breached that 10 threshold, which is basically a stop ship. We've lost confidence in this. It's not going to meet customer requirements. They're going to be looking for these reports proving the strength. And so that was essentially the product that we couldn't ship. And then we quickly reverted back to a different compound, slight difference, where we were back and now currently shipping product that's acceptable. And so you can kind of see, if I go back to that very first chart, just that history from day 1 to where we are today. You can see this last batch and how it compares to where we just jumped back to this A11, like I just referred to. So yeah, that's kind of stepping out of, say, the demonstration a little bit, from trying to show the audience and show our listeners just how to use TrendTracker, what charts are available, what different options you have on the charts. That was what I wanted to accomplish today. So I think I've done that. And let's get to some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing. Actually, one last thing popped into my head. So distributing these charts, a lot of times you need to share this with colleagues, put it into a report. Just like the the table where you can export to CSV or to XML. The charts, you can click this button to save it, to copy it, to print it, or you can right click it itself. So definitely useful, and I'll end on that. So let's stop sharing and get to some questions. It's 1:40. Let's see. I know there was some registration questions, so I have those listed out that I want to get to, and then I'm going to pull up the Q&A that has just come in. So there's two that have come in. I'm going to start with the pre-registration ones. So first question is, how do you remove outliers from the control chart while still retaining the value? So answer to that question is, you cannot just right click a particular point and say hide or exclude or delete. That's what you can do is, if you do have an outlier, you're probably going to want to look into that test. And so you'll find that sample and open it in Bluehill Universal to look at that full test curve, and you might do a little bit of due diligence to see maybe what's been going on in that test for that particular outlier. And maybe the operator could have like fat fingered a dimension and been off by a factor of 10, or forgot a decimal or something. And you can modify that. So you can modify the actual input that was incorrectly entered to begin with when the test was being run, and you can refinish that sample. And that will send that modification to the TrendTracker database, and it's going to update that to be the proper value. And then you'll see the outlier no longer there if it was that type of mistake. If it's something that you've kind of found the problem for, and you're trying to actually remove that altogether, you can delete that specimen from the sample and do the same thing, refinish, and it will remove itself from the database. But those actions have to happen from Bluehill Universal when you're interacting with that sample file. But it's a good feature request. I see where you're coming, so I think that's something that we can add to our to-do list. Next question is, how do you make notes in the control chart to easily assess out of control situations? So similar answer, I would say, in this case. So I think it's a good feature request that you cannot, there's not like a way of right clicking and say comment on this outlier. So you can add your notes within TrendTracker. But again, I think that is a good feature request. But you similarly to the last one, you're likely going to be opening up your Bluehill sample to see what's potentially gone on. And you might have note fields for that sample, for that particular specimen, and you can make those notes in the sample file, and you can again finish. And when we go and we're looking at TrendTracker, one of the columns in your table could be notes from the operator, or notes. You could have a specific outlier field if you want, and have that be a field that's actually displayed in the TrendTracker table and it would be kind of, you could store a text string there. Next question is, when I initially set up TrendTracker, can I view my historical results? So yeah, so that's a question that we get almost every time that we're promoting TrendTracker, where, hey, I think TrendTracker can add some value, but I have thousands of samples that I would like to be able to immediately start doing analysis on. I don't want to wait 6 months to be able to do something meaningful with just new data. So what you can use is our batch export option, where you point to a particular folder that contains the samples that you want to put onto the TrendTracker database. and you just say batch export. So it'll send those historical files, I think, back to Bluehill 2. So Bluehill 2, Bluehill 3, and Bluehill Universal sample files can be kind of sucked into the database to be queried. One thing that as you do that, we have to be careful of is the fields, the names of your calculations and columns, that you want to make sure there's some consistency there, or else you'll have kind of slight variations of different columns that really are the same thing. If you're calling it max load in one place but max force in another, it's going to think that those are two different results. So something to just keep your eye out for. And that leads me to just two reminders, and then there are some questions that I haven't quite been able to look at, but I'll look at those right after this. Raw data. So raw data and the actual test curve is not something that's viewable within TrendTracker, in that you're looking at the method parameters, the sample parameters, the specimen parameters, all of the, and the test results associated to the testing that was done. That's what lives in TrendTracker's database. That the test curves, if those need to be viewed, then if you actually need to, there's two different options. Number one is you open up that sample in Bluehill Universal. And number two is if you had saved a PDF and you want to just look at the curve in PDF form, you can find it wherever it lives, whether it's in your Bluehill Central file system or a network drive or something. But that's a key point, is that the raw data is not accessible, is not sent from the test equipment. The other reminder, that's kind of another common question that we get that's worth noting to this crowd listening in, is that the data that is viewable and queryable and is exclusively sent from Bluehill applications that have this TrendTracker plugin. So Bluehill Universal has it. We actually had TrendTracker in Bluehill 3. So some of our Bluehill 3 users have been using TrendTracker. And there's a couple other Bluehill applications for other test equipment that have TrendTracker outputs. But third-party equipment can't send its data. So third-party equipment, non-Instron equipment, cannot send data to TrendTracker. And there's not an import function at this time to import from a file from an external device. Okay, so now let me get into just the questions that came in. So the first one is about excluding the control point but not deleting it. Does it have a note field to explain? So again, yeah, that is what I kind of talked about with the first question. So it's probably the same person. So thanks, Andrew, for chiming in. The other thing that you actually made me think of when you said exclude is that if you don't want to delete it, or if you don't want to modify it and you want to just exclude it for the time being, that's actually another action you can do within the sample. So unfortunately, again, not in TrendTracker, but you could exclude that specimen, not delete it, but exclude it from the sample, and it would have the same effect, but you wouldn't lose the data. And next question, is this a new or an updated version of Bluehill? The one I have currently does not look like this. So the answer to that is, so what we just were looking at today, that is Bluehill Central. So Bluehill Central is a new application. It just was released in the beginning of 2022 as this lab management application. So it's not a replacement of Bluehill Universal. It's not a replacement of Bluehill 3 or Bluehill 2. It serves its own purpose. It works alongside those testing applications. So it is new, but it also has the visual aesthetic or branding of our current platform for Bluehill, which is Bluehill Universal. So since 2017, when Bluehill Universal was released, we had that kind of dark background with the tiles on the front that are similar with our testing software, Bluehill Universal, and we've made consistent with other Bluehill applications such as Bluehill Central. But yes, it looks quite different from Bluehill 3 or Bluehill 2 if you're used to that. Where do I get it? Okay, so then where do I get it? Good question. I guess we will, and Nick will be sending probably some information on the back end of this webinar to get a quote. So it's something that you'd engage your local Instron sales rep to say, hey, this is our site, this is our equipment, this is the software we're currently running. If you are confident that TrendTracker will be good for your lab, then they can give you a quote for that upgrade. If you need a little bit more confidence, that we have our sales group, our applications team, that they're happy to arrange kind of a one-on-one demonstration whenever for 30 minutes or an hour to just actually have a personalized session to talk through maybe how you intend to use it and if it's a good fit. So we definitely highly encourage that. What would that upgrade come? Sorry, I'll say it out loud. Would the upgrade with the app come with training? Yes, of course. I believe that all of our software upgrades, they typically come with basic training for the application which is 4 hours. But because Bluehill Central is what we would say kind of an advanced option, so not just the standard, hey, let's just pull this piece of plastic apart and get max load and that's all I need to do, but this is an advanced function of kind of our Instron software offerings, that it would be sold with our advanced training, which is I think an additional 4 hours just dedicated to using TrendTracker. And from an installation side, when you get into kind of what's involved, there is some pre-installation work to make sure that your site can support that network solution that we're talking about, because TrendTracker it lives with Bluehill Central. It's part of Bluehill Central. And so you need to make sure that your lab can have its systems networked together to actually produce this network solution and be able to access things remotely. So there's options that you can certainly talk to in more detail with our sales force, and then ultimately with our service engineers who are going to be helping through the installation process if you pursue the product. So I think that is the questions. I think I've gone through everything. So thanks for the time. I'll hand it back over to Nick.
All right, thanks, Dan. Before we wrap things up, I just have a few quick notes. So if any other questions do pop in the Q&A before I wrap things up, I'll make sure those get over to Dan so we can follow up by email. And like Dan alluded to, I'm also going to be sending a follow-up email with a link to this recording and then some other links to related content like Bluehill Central. I know there was a white paper that Dan had referenced, so we're going to include those in there. And then lastly, a survey should pop up once this webinar ends. We'd really appreciate if you could take a moment, let us know what you thought of today's presentation. And so with that said, I just want to say thanks again to Dan for presenting today. Thanks to all of you for attending. Really appreciate you joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.